Hello everyone, welcome back to the Tent of Abraham. I'm Tamir Kreisman from Israel. This is Parashat Vayeshev. He dwelt, he sat. Genesis 37:1 to 40:23. This one is called The Shape of Things to Come. So this is somewhat of a biblical soap opera, isn't it? Many of these characters are more relatable than in previous parashot, in the sense where we begin to see kind of flaws, active flaws in our ancestors. This is not to say that the patriarchs and the matriarchs were perfect. Absolutely not. They had to be flawed for the simple reason of teshuvah. You see, repentance, teshuvah, it's a command in the Torah. Not only is it a command in the Torah, it's the overlying purpose to every single mitzvah that we do. Teshuvah, lashuv, to return to where? We'll see. It's basically the rectification of the world. And so, why rectify something if it's not broken? You see, so the thing is, not only is it broken, but it's completely shattered. The more pieces, the more souls, the more individuals get to partake in this rectification. Or as Prince would say, dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to get through this thing called life. Let's go crazy. So now ain't that the truth, but it's more than just getting through. It's how we all do what we all got to do. If one of the most significant themes and commands in the Torah is teshuvah, for a person who is theoretically perfect, that would make them anything but. Because if you don't sin, if you don't fall, if you don't slip up even once, how can you possibly fulfill this command, thereby fulfilling all the mitzvot of the Torah, which every Jew is commanded to do? You see, teshuvah is part of our tikkun. Now, as time moves forward, spiritually, it's actually moving back. We're doing a tikkun going backwards as time moves forward. We've discussed this concept before. We pray, Chadesh Yameinu Kekedim, renew our days as the days of old. Now, this is a reference to also the Beit HaMikdash, but primarily the Garden of Eden. Gan Eden Mikedim. The Garden of Eden after the tikkun, after the rectification, of course. Meaning the Garden of Eden was also incomplete, right? How could the serpent enter the Garden of Eden? Everything is perfectly by design. It's because God gave us the opportunity to perfect the garden, the world. And this is how it's done. So as time goes by and the generations continue to come forth, we find that the fathers can only complete their work through the sons. You see, they move forward, but the sons complete the work going backwards. Abraham could only have been perfected as the attribute of chesed, mercy, once Isaac took his rightful place as gvura, judgment, not even after Isaac was born, right? And this being done at the Akedah, Kedat Yitzchak, the binding of Isaac. It elevated them both, which could have only happened if they worked together. We've also discussed this, as father and son, each playing their own part, fully conscious and aware of what was happening. We've also learned that Isaac was a spitting image of his father Abraham. So when Abraham was binding his son, it was as if he was seeing himself bind a younger version of himself upon the altar. And likewise for Isaac, seeing like an older version of himself binding himself upon the altar. Why am I saying this? Because Yosef was a spitting image of his father Yaakov. We've already learned that Yaakov was a spitting image of Adam, right? After the fall, as he was also the perfection of Adam through Avraham and Yitzchak. So why did God choose Jacob as the culmination of the patriarchs? Jacob had a difficult life, not only because of what he had gone through already, but what he would go through and what he knew that his descendants would go through and would have to go through. God showed him exactly what would happen with his kids, with us, until the very end of time. He saw details. He saw tremendous suffering. He saw all that we would have to go through just to make it through. He saw the rise of Nazi Germany, Amalek, Esav, Edom, Rome, the West, that would almost destroy us completely. And he prayed against this from happening. Now, make no mistake, okay, some of you don't know this, and again, I'm not getting political here, we're going with historical facts. Google whatever I'm saying, but again, this is in the Torah, and I'm also going to take the Torah and the Talmud as my references. How do you think Hitler and the National Socialist Party rose to power? Where do you think they got all this funding from? It was U.S. funding. Henry Ford, Grandpappy Bush, that's right, IBM, Yeah, and what, you think President Roosevelt didn't know about the death camps? And he didn't do a damn thing until it was convenient to get the support of the U.S. Jews. My grandparents were telling me they saw U.S. planes fly over the camps almost every day. Why? Just bomb the tracks. Why? Again, do your own research. What do you think happened to all these high-ranking, murdering Nazi officers and scientists after the war? Again, do your research. Where do you think they went? If you didn't know this, they're sitting in the highest posts in the United States right now. NASA, the CIA, the FBI, the military. Do I need to spell out Operation Paperclip? It's all coming full circle. You see, it wasn't only Nazi Germany that was responsible for the Holocaust. It was the entire West that was responsible for the Holocaust. Why do you think the States is so divided right now? What do you think we're speaking of over the last few weeks? And the Republicans still believe that they're actually fighting the Democrats, and the Democrats believe they're fighting the Republicans. Puppets. I'd say wake up, but it doesn't matter anymore. This is really all that matters. And you don't believe me that Jacob saw this coming? Here you go. Don't think the sages knew about this? Here's Masechet Megillah, page 14a, written almost 2,000 years ago. And of course, they knew this from way, way before. It reads, V'amar Rabbi Yitzchak, mai dechtiv, al titen Hashem ma'avei rasha zamemo, al tafek yaromu sela, amar Yaakov lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, ribono shel olam, al titen le'esav harasha, ta'avat libo zamemo, al tafek zo. And Rabbi Yitzchak also said, what is the meaning of that which is written? Grant not, O Lord, the desires of the wicked, further not his evil device, so that they not exalt themselves, Selah. This is from Psalms 140, verse 9. Jacob said before the Holy One, blessed be he, Master of the universe, grant not the wicked Esav the desires of his heart as he wishes to destroy us. Further not his evil device, Zamemo. Zomem is like plots. To remove the muzzle, zamam, that constrains him and prevents him from breaking out and gathering further strength. This is in reference to Germamia shel Edom, she'ilmalei hen yotzin machrivin kol haolam kulo. Anybody know what Germamia is? Germania, Germany, shel Edom of Edom, right? Esav, i.e. Germany, which is near the land of Edom, i.e. Rome. As if the Germans would go forth, they would destroy the entire world. How would our sages know this almost 2,000 years ago, taken from specifically Tehillim, which was written 1,000 years before that? I don't know. Was this prophecy from our sages? No, it was not. This is their own insight. This is their own understanding along with the knowledge that was passed down. So pay attention. Everything is coming into fruition right now. After everything that Jacob had been through thus far in his life, he had survived his brother twice. He had survived Lavan for 20 years. He had survived the Amorites and the Canaanites, as we read a couple weeks ago. But did he just survive, or did he thrive? He thrived, very much so. So what was he so afraid of all the time? We see Jacob, I was afraid here, I was afraid there, please God here, please God there. What? His children, his offspring, his descendants, us. He was afraid for us because he saw what we would have to go through. He was always afraid for us, his children. Surviving? Sure, always. Here we are. After all, the Jews are still here. While our oppressors have come and gone in forms of different empires and all the exiles, and we're at the end of the final exile right now. It's the same entities just wearing different garb, that's all. But did we thrive? perhaps briefly here and there, and that was entirely dependent upon us and our dedication to God and His ways, i.e. the Torah and the mitzvot. Now Jacob was one of the closest things to perfect, as he had perfected Abraham and Isaac, but in addition, he had to perfect his brother's side as well, we discussed. This is not a beginner's class. We've been doing this for several years right now, so we're just going to go with knowledge that I hope you have, all right? So there's a responsibility for Esau fell upon Jacob. So he didn't live this magical life as his father and grandfather did. I mean, granted, they went through their own trials, but the constant struggle, I mean, it said Abraham died at a good old age. He had everything. He was chill. He was good. He was happy. He was sated. Look at Jacob's life, and it's not even over yet. He worked. He toiled, he suffered, he struggled, he fought, he lost, he wept, and he lost hope. But he would also regain it and rise up once again, and we continue to do so till this very day. The story that is being presented before us here, although it may seem nice and sweet at first, how Jacob finally rested, dwelt in the land. Is he done? This is not so. His spirit never rested, and he constantly lived in fear, because of the things to come. He saw what was going to happen, the things that he never got permission to reveal to his children. Can you imagine this? He couldn't tell them what was to come, but he could tell them how to avoid that which he could not share. Again, even on his deathbed, he tried to share with his children, come, I'll tell you what's going to happen at the end of days, but he did not. He only hinted them towards staying on the right path. That's the best he could do. And that within itself is torturous. You know information. You have information. You see your kids walking into disaster. You know what's going to befall them. You can't tell them that that's coming. But you can just say, do this. And then look at Moshe also, right? Who's saying the same thing. Listen, don't even go there. Just do this. Because I know after I'm gone what you guys are going to do. I know it. You're going to do it. But do this. That's the best that we can do, right? Because if you knew everything that would happen, you would obviously change your ways. If you knew that Mashiach was coming in one day, everybody would, live their lives differently. If you knew that Mashiach was coming not in your lifetime, you surely would live your life differently. That's why we hope and pray for Mashiach every single moment of every single day. I want him to come now, ready or not. Anyway, and as far as fear goes with Jacob, fear for one's children, is that not a sin? Fear that God would not take care of them or that his will was anything less than perfect. I mean, in a sense, that is a sin, but he was also a father. Can you blame him for that? We are the seed of Jacob after all. Nevertheless, it's because of that fear that we have this story of Joseph and also what's to come. Because judgment is about to befall Jacob, and Joseph is about to pay the price. This is alluded to in the first verse of the Parsha, 37:1. Vayeshev Yaakov be'eretz megurei aviv be'eretz Canaan. Jacob dwelt in the land of his father, sojourning in the land of Canaan. Why the double tap? Okay, if the land of his father is the land of Canaan, you could have had one or the other. Why both of them? Because what did Isaac, his father, represent, if not harsh judgment? In the land of his father, in the land of Canaan. He's about to go through some judgment in the land of Canaan. And so, when we can read how Jacob is about to sit in judgment in the land of Canaan, how do we know that Joseph is going to pay the price, right? These are the generations of Jacob, Joseph. Ele toldot Yaakov, Yosef. Boom. Right there. Should it not have said, these are the generations of Jacob, Jacob begot Reuben? What does this show us? This shows us that Joseph was supposed to continue Jacob's line. Now let's compare this to creation. The first generations that we see, toldot, in the Torah are between the heavens and the earth, and Abraham, Genesis 2:4. These are the generations of the heavens and the earth when they were created, behibaram be'avraham, on the day the Lord God made earth and heaven. God created the world for a man like Abraham. He found Abraham. Abraham was the first man in the world to make him proud, who would resemble his ways and continue his works. Genesis 25:19, and these are the generations of Isaac, the son of Abraham. Abraham begot Isaac. We discussed this, right? How come it's a double? El toldot Yitzchak ben Avram. Okay, great. Avram olid Yitzchak. Why are you giving it to us twice? Abraham begot Isaac in the same manner as God begot Adam. He was in his likeness and in his image. His likeness because he kept the Torah and the ways of God just as his father did, and in his image because he looked just like him. This was the bond that they shared when they both helped each other in the binding of Isaac. I'm reiterating these points so you see the patterns and structure in the Torah. Now, if you're able to see this and apply it correctly, properly, it will open up a whole new dimension or dimensions for you, allowing you to broaden your horizons, expand your knowledge, and enable you to gain understanding based upon the simple text, just the pshat. If you start making associations, this is how our sages worked. Oh, wait a minute. This word means this in other places, and this is the connotation, and all of a sudden you start getting a picture together. You can do that too, okay? In Hebrew, of course. So when we see these are the generations of Jacob, Joseph, even if we had a question or a doubt, once we read the very next verse, and Israel loved Joseph more than all his sons, there's little doubt that our understanding is correct. Furthermore, you see, and Israel, the Israel. Israel is, okay, there's Jacob and there's Israel. They're both the same, but they're also not. It's more of the spiritual side of Jacob, if you will. Which also gives us the understanding that Yaakov's fear in the past will lead to Joseph's suffering in the future. But Joseph's suffering would lead to Yaakov's rectification. You see how this works? It's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful pattern. Just like there was a binding of Isaac, there's, in a sense, a binding of Joseph. And this will be, we'll touch upon that later. Now, as we know, judgment does not just fall upon a person for no reason. Meaning there is something that you had to have done in order for you to go through what you're going through. No one just gets punished 'cause. Okay, it doesn't work that way. A righteous person, however, would not look at judgments or punishments as hardships, but rather as God's love towards that individual's rectification. You got to struggle. God gave that to you for you to elevate your spiritual self. And that's why it says we have to thank God even more so during the hard times than even when times are good. King David being the quintessential example of that. The only thing we should never do is assume that we know why we're going through the things that we are going through. Only God knows our din v'cheshbon, our accounts. Din is judgment, cheshbon is accounts, basically. One of the few things we do know is only what's told to us directly. For instance, let's say if God says, if you do this, you'll get that. He gave it in, if you honor thy father and thy mother, and sending away the mama bird from to take the eggs, you shall live long, many days. Okay, so that's one of the only commands that God gave us the reward for that command. And the other thing he says in Proverbs 3, 9, and 10, he says, test him on this. Honor the Lord for your substance and from the first of your grain, and your barn shall be filled with plenty, and your vats will overflow with new wine. And then in Malachi, he actually says the words, bring the whole of the tithes into the treasury, so that there may be nourishment in my house, and test me now therewith, says the Lord of hosts, to see if I will not open for you the sluices of heaven, and pour down for you blessing until there be no room to suffice for it. But when it comes to the righteous, whose life sins you may be able to count on, a couple of fingers maybe, it's easier to say what goes where. Well, David, you sinned like this. God told him what your sin was, and this is what your punishment's going to be. But don't come and judge in a person if this person went through this, that means that A, B, and C. Do not go there. Do not do that for your own sake, because you're bringing that on your head. But you should know Every judgment for Israel is actually serving the world as a rectification. So these things were all supposed to happen, but the individual had to come, had it coming, and was nevertheless punished or corrected for their own choices, for the choices that they made. Right? Everyone sinned, even Moses sinned. But we already discussed not where you think he did. And his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, so they hated him, and they could not speak with him peacefully. Vayiru echav ki oto ahav avihem mikol echav, vayisneu oto velo yachlu dabro leshalom. The ones who actually come out of the first few verses of this parsha, it's actually making the brothers look good. More specifically, it was the sons of Leah. We discussed a few weeks ago how the maidservants of Leah and Rachel were also considered to be righteous women, not only as an extension of their mistresses, but also on their own merit. They did, after all, give birth to 4 out of the 12 tribes, right? And by all accounts, were considered to be the wives of Jacob. Nevertheless, they were the outer part of Kedusha. They were the extension, if you will. And they were more susceptible to sin. These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph was 17 years old, being a shepherd. So we know he's a shepherd. We know he's 17. We know he's continuing Jacob's line. This is a packed pasuk. He was with his brothers with the flocks, and he was a lad, meaning he was young. He was naive. And was with the sons of Bilhah and with the sons of Zilpah. So we know exactly who he was with. His father's wives. Not maidservants, they're his wives. And Joseph brought evil tales about them to their father. Now Joseph, he was a good kid, but he was a kid. He was extremely gifted. He was handsome, just like Jacob. And he'd also never seen battle. He was, for the most part, he was a gentle soul. He didn't share the bond that his brother shared, after all. I mean, how could he? And brothers in arms, you know this. When you're in a unit and everyone's willing to die for one another, it kind of builds something. And if you're on the outside, you're on the outside, right? It's you against everybody. Yosef was protected. He was sheltered. Coddled, maybe. He wasn't hardened by any means. And as a result, the sons of Leah found him to be, an annoying daddy's little boy. A do-gooder, right? So the only brothers who could somewhat tolerate him were the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah. And when they were behaving inappropriately, and make no mistake, they were, he straight up snitched on them. And snitches get stitches, right? This also goes to show us that the sons of Leah would never have done these things, as they were the inner part of the Kedusha, and they were tzaddikim. Now, they all were tzaddikim, make no mistake, but like we said, even a tzaddik messes up, and the whole point is to do tshuva, and we'll see later on in the story how they do complete tshuva because of this, and they all elevated themselves because of this. Now, as it is when your privileged, younger privileged sibling goes and tattles on you to daddy, it's not going to help your relationship, right? It's like, I love you guys. Did you see what they did? No. Furthermore, and Israel loved Joseph more than all his other sons, because he was a son of his old age, and he made him a fine woolen coat. Naturally, that's going to cause a tremendous rift between the brothers, as jealousy is the likely outcome. Should they have been jealous? You know what? Does it really matter if they should or should not have been jealous? Whose fault is this? This is Jacob's fault. What is he doing? What is he doing? Jacob was not like God, who loves his children Israel equally, whether you're, a great rabbi or a guy that doesn't know how to read. You're Israel. It's all one as far as God is concerned. Treat each other kindly. But more like God loving Israel more so than all the other nations, because he separated Israel for himself. Israel are God's heritage, right? Which causes the nations to hate us and want to kill us. However, this is where the righteousness of the brothers comes into play. And that's why it's written this way. And his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, so they hated him. Not cool, right? And they could not speak with him peaceably. One of the things that is despicable to God is duplicitousness. Did I say that correctly? Yes, duplicitousness. Also known in Hebrew as echad bapeh, echad balev. You'll hear it, people saying it every now and then. The source is found in Masechet Psachim 113b. It talks about three things that God loves. We'll skip over that. But now, the Holy One, blessed be He, hates three people, okay? One, as in the number one who says one statement with his mouth and means another in his heart, i.e., a hypocrite. Now these are the brothers, the sons of Layla, okay? But they weren't doing that, because although they had it in their heart, they did not say it with their mouth. They kept their mouth shut. This is the example of if you got nothing nice to say, don't say anything. Two, one who knows testimony about another person and does not testify on his behalf, meaning that his testimony could vindicate that person and he says nothing. He's, guilty. And three, one who observes a licentious matter performed by another person and testifies against him alone. And this, by the way, can be seen by what Joseph did. Joseph saw his brothers doing wrong, and he went by himself all sneaky-like to his father. Hey, they did this and this and that. You come with witnesses. First you discuss with your brothers and everything. Anyway, so according to Rashi, velo yachlu dabro shalom, they could not speak to him peaceably. Mitoch ganutam lamadnu shibcham, shelo dibru achat bapeh ve'echad balev. They could not speak to him peaceably. Through their condemnation, we learned their praise, because they did not speak one statement with their mouth and another with their heart. They were very, very real, okay? Now, as you may or may not know, if some of you have been to Israel, a lot of you are in Israel, this so happens to be how Israelis are. They won't smile at you and pretend to be nice, or pretend to like you if they don't like you. If we don't like you, you're going to know about it. Harsh? Probably. Rude? Most likely. Necessarily righteous? Hey, absolutely. So given the fact that we are all very familiar with the story of Joseph and believe we know the circumstances, it's never really that simple, is it? No matter what the brothers did, no matter what Joseph or Jacob did or didn't do, it all led everyone exactly to where God wanted them to be. Never forget, Genesis 45:5, okay? We've been given this gift of the end of the story. But now do not be sad, and let it not trouble you that you sold me here. For it was to preserve life that God sent me before you. Joseph recognizes it. All this had to happen. Don't be, this is by God. Now this is all well and good, but Jacob knew this was coming, didn't he? We have the luxury of knowing the outcome, which should give us tremendous insight and understanding as to how and why. Abraham received the prophecy already during the covenant of the pieces. So of course Jacob knew this. He also knew that Joseph was going to be king at some point, and he knew that Joseph was going to take over and continue his lineage. But this is where he ultimately erred. He wasn't entirely wrong, but he also wasn't entirely right, and this is the importance. Again, Jacob's a working man, right? Because as we know, it was Judah who became God's chosen king and King Messiah. In fact, even when Joseph was in Egypt, he was never actually crowned king. We know this, but rather ruler, always second to the king. Ele toldot Yaakov Yosef. These are the generations of Jacob, Joseph. In order for all this to happen, Joseph had to be taken. Do you think Jacob didn't see that his other sons were jealous? Do you think that he didn't know what it would do to them when he gave Joseph that coat? Do you think Jacob was that heartless and inconsiderate towards his other sons, his very flesh and blood, who he raised and fought by his side, protecting him and his wives, caring for their house and establishing the house of Jacob within the land of Canaan? Of course he knew what it would do. But Jacob also knew that there were no coincidences. Remember, we started with an Israel, right? Don't forget that. When we surrender ourselves to the will of God, he uses us for good. Jacob and his sons were good. They were all tzaddikim. Even when they sold their brother, they believed that they were acting according to halacha. I believe we discussed this in the previous teaching. Make no mistake, not the last one, but last year. So make no mistake, they were wrong, okay? And Israel has paid for their sins. Meaning a tikkun had to be made, but a tikkun had to be made anyway. You see, we're all just vessels. So who do you think put it on Jacob's heart to treat Joseph that way, to visibly love and favor him more so than all his other sons? It was God, of course. But you see, Jacob, he messed up. And he did that only once. He became afraid when he finally saw Esav. And we discussed this last year. He was not afraid for himself, but for his descendants. Because like we saw last week, Jacob was afraid that he might actually kill Esav. He was completely protected. After everything he had been through, he knows nothing can touch me. But the kids, oy vey, the kinder, right? But the separation of Joseph already began in last week's Parsha. Chapter 33, Jacob lifted his eyes to 33:1. Jacob lifted his eyes and saw, and behold, Esav was coming, and with him were 400 men. So he divided the children with Leah and with Rachel and with the two maidservants. Jacob already divided the house of Israel. You see this? Out of fear, which is you should never do. And he placed the maidservants and their children first, and Leah and her children after, and Rachel and Joseph he placed last. So we see the separation of three groups here. One, the maidservants and their children, the ones who misbehaved, who we start out the portion with. Two, Leah and her children, the ones who could not speak to him in peace. And three, Rachel and Joseph, they were last, they were protected, they were separate, right? Now this is the real reason Joseph, the innocent teenager, was taken. But don't think for 1 second that God wasn't in on it too. There's just a wonderful hint over here. In this order regarding Joseph, then later and then also afterwards later in regards to the coat. We knew that the job of Mashiach ben Yosef is to subdue Esav in the end of days, right? Mashiach ben Yosef is the warrior. Mashiach ben David is the one that brings peace to the world, okay? When Mashiach ben David comes to the scene, there is peace on earth. There is no more war. God's kingdom is established. But Mashiach ben Yosef, he's the one that fights the battles for Israel and destroys Edom. When all the armies of the world are going to turn on Israel, Gog and Magog happens, right? First they're going to go at each other, then Gog and Magog is going to happen, then it's Mashiach ben Yosef who is going to go to war with them. So again, just so we understand what's going to happen for God's kingdom to be established, all the world's governments have to be destroyed, which means that Israel cannot be part of the United Nations. The U.S. either turns its back on Israel, or it just doesn't exist, right? In order to come to Israel's aid. As we know, because it says in prophecy, we shall absolutely stand alone. Because we have no one that we can rely upon but our Father in heaven. Amen. We also know that the angel of Edom is the Samech Mem, the angel of death, the Satan. And we also know that the end of darkness is the end of death. We learned this last year in Parashat Miketz. You could look that up. The word the end in Hebrew is ketz. So Miketz means the end of darkness. Jacob gave Yaakov kutonet pasim, a coat of stripes, pasim and stripes, right? Pasim and ketz have the same numerical value, meaning that in the end, the ketz, Mashiach ben Yosef, will take out Esav. God's master plan hinted to us all throughout. You see this? So even though Jacob essentially messed up because of his fear, even that was correct. You see this? So let's continue. When we dream dreams, much of them have to do with how our day went, right? What we spent our time doing, what we might have been watching on TV, conversations we might have had, something that influenced our day. So when Joseph tells his brothers about the first dream, it was a bit harder to dismiss it. He dreamed of binding sheaves in the field, which was very common work for those days. But what were the sons of Joseph doing? The thing is, the sons, as well as Joseph, were very specifically shepherds. It says it right there in the first verse, and he was a shepherd. His brothers were shepherds. That's what they were, shepherds, right? Jacob had his people to take care of all the wheat and all that, and he's dreaming about this. If he would have said, if this in fact what he was doing during the day, and they said, well, yeah, of course you would think about that because this is what you're doing, but it's not something he ever really did. So maybe it got their attention. And so, why is this happening? This is God giving Joseph the dream, of course, in order to get the desired result. And he said to them, listen now to this dream which I have dreamed. Vayomer elehem shimu na hachalom hazeh asher chalamti. Shimu na hachalom. Listen now to this dream. The first letters of here with the word na and this dream spell the word sin'ah. Shin nun aleph hey. Shimu na hachalom. Listen now to this dream. Hate. Wow. Furthermore, it was God who put it upon his heart to share his dreams with his brothers. As we discussed last year, that's never a wise idea, okay, to let someone else interpret your dream. I see people still doing it. You like to post these things. Why? Don't do that. You don't understand what kind of power you're giving people to interpret your dreams, however. They're very, very private, okay? Don't share it with anybody. Like, really don't, okay? I mean, you can share it, but not publicly. A little bit of seichel goes a very, very long way. If a tzaddik interprets a dream, then they have the power to make it so, meaning speaking it into existence, which is exactly what the righteous, the tzaddikim, sons of Jacob, did. So his brothers said to him, will you reign over us or will you govern us? And they continued further to hate him on account of his dreams and on account of his words. Now, Vayomru lo echav hamloch timloch aleinu im mashol timshol banu. Hamloch timloch aleinu, you will reign over us. Im mashol timshol banu, im mashol timshol, you will govern us. The first letters of these three words spell out emet, truth. The first letters, right? Im, aleph, mashol, mem, timshol, taf, that's emet. In other words, you will reign over us, emet, truth. This is going to happen. That's sealed right there. But it was the second dream already that pushed his brothers over the edge, so much so that Jacob had to dial it back, which is why he attempted to discredit the dream itself, hoping to calm the spirits of his sons. I need him to descend to Egypt. I don't need him to be killed right here in my backyard. And again, he dreamed another dream, and he related it to his brothers, and he said, behold, I have dreamed another dream. Behold, the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars were prostrating themselves to me. And he told it to his father and to his brothers, and his father rebuked him and said to him, what is this dream that you have dreamed? Will we come, I, your mother, and your brothers, to prostrate ourselves to you to the ground? Now, how did Jacob try when he rebuked him? Why did he do it? To soothe the anger of his brothers. Like, dude, sometimes, it's like, we discussed this. Moses did this with God, right? Where he tried to calm down God's anger, but he still smacked Israel. He's like, what are you guys doing? You have any idea what you're doing? So anyways, kind of the go-between over there. So how did he try and discredit the dream? Was his mother still alive? No. See? She passed away. He's like, what? Your mother's not alive, dude. This is, it's crazy. Forget about it. And nevertheless, so his brothers envied him, but his father kept the matter. Vaikanu bo echav ve'aviv shamar et hadavar. Davar, okay, is the thing, is the word, but it also refers to malchut, to kingship. This is not only his earthly father who kept the kingship, but also our heavenly Father, meaning that God did indeed reserve the initial kingship for the son of Rachel. This is not Joseph, but rather Benjamin. The first king of Israel was King Saul. We know this. And he was crowned, and he was from the tribe of Benjamin. He was crowned because the people wanted a king like the rest of the nations. You remember that? Give us a king like the rest of the nations. At some point, we're all going to have kings, but God's chosen kings. He was the people's chosen king. The poor guy was set up to fail. So the second king of Israel was King David from the tribe of Judah, and he was God's pick, which is why Solomon was selected to build the temple. You see, David was David was at war his entire life, right? And this is from the side of Binah, understanding, which is also on the left side. This is the left side of judgment. While King Solomon was on the right side, Chokhmah, we know, he was wisdom. And he had peace his whole life. And Mashiach ben David, Shlema, and then ben David, right? He will be the keter on top, the crown on top, above them both. And he will be the tikkun haklali, the general or overall rectification of the world. Keter, chokhmah, and binah. And during his days, the name of God will be one in the world. And his brothers went to pasture their father's flocks in Shechem. This is yet another foreshadowing of things to come. And Shechem did not carry good memories for any of them. In fact, it has negative power for the sons of Jacob. Now look at the language of the next verse. It's like none of this makes sense, and yet it fits perfectly. And Israel said to Joseph. So we know to pay attention, there's something beyond here, right? Are your brothers not pasturing in Shechem? Come, I will send you to them. And he said to him, here I am. Vayomer Israel el Yosef, halo achecha roim b'Shechem, lecha v'ashlechecha elehem, vayomer lo hineni. When Jacob is referred to as Israel, that means that the spiritual is dominating. So, whatever is said right now comes from above to below. In other words, it's coming through Jacob. Are your brothers not pasturing in Shechem? That place, where your sister was kidnapped and raped. That place where your brothers, Shimon and Levi, slaughtered all its inhabitants for being in on the whole thing. That place that started all the wars that we fought against the Amorites. That place. Your brothers are there. The ones that hate you. This was a test that Jacob was now giving Joseph. And depending on Joseph's answer, he could determine the outcome. Our sages say that the heavens had to agree to everything that took place and would come to pass, especially what was about to go down. This is why Jacob, or in this case, Israel, was compelled to send his favorite beloved son Joseph into a bad place with very capable men who hated him. Now, although Joseph was young, he was extremely wise. But that also doesn't mean that he wasn't, socially retarded. He knew his brothers hated him. He wanted his brothers to accept him. He just didn't know how to do it. There are some brilliant people who have zero social skills. Einstein was like one of them. He was known to not have really good social skills. He developed them later on, but still. Whenever he tried, he just ended up making things worse, But he never gave up. And he said immediately, here I am, Hineni, pick me, I can do this. When Jacob saw how quick and eager Joseph was to go and see his brothers, despite him knowing how much they despised him, it was a clear sign to Jacob that no harm would come to Joseph. Now, if you've noticed, it's always the person's immediate reaction that shows their true colors. Notice this, okay? In life. And our characters in the Torah are no different from that. Because it's those immediate reactions. When people are given time to respond, that's not necessarily the first thing. Sometimes, you could see when I'm angry, because that's my first reaction. It's like, oh, I guess I am angry, and I didn't even know it. You understand? The whole point is to catch yourself in that. Why am I angry? Or so on and so forth. Or if someone says something, you get an uncomfortable feeling. Understand that uncomfortable feeling and don't act upon it. That's where you grab it. Everything is a test all the time. Pay attention. It'll make your life much easier, and you will elevate your spiritual self. You're welcome. So it's those immediate reactions that show who we are truly underneath, or who's lurking, or what is lurking directly beneath the surface. For instance, the only reason that the three angels came into the tent of Abraham was only because Abraham ran after them and begged them to come in. Remember, they started to turn. He was not worthy of hosting angels. They were coming there, but his final card that said, okay, yeah, we're going to come to your tent is you come and doing what he did. And then he stood over them, right? Then he commanded them. This was the deciding factor for him. When the angels then came to Lot, he was not worthy of being saved. For the first time he asked them to come in. As we know, they turned him down. No, we're not coming in. But it was because he begged them after. that they turned him down, that's what made him worthy of being saved. So even when someone is about to give you something, don't just grab it. Understand? You understand what I'm saying? Everything is a test until the very last second, or it ain't over till the fat lady sings or whatnot. And so here we see Joseph's honest reaction. Hineni, Jacob didn't even finish his sentence. He says, yeah, me. Now, he could have, for just one of several reasons, said this, and that would have been enough. The reasons are, he immediately ran to do his father's bidding. He was a good son, and he immediately ran into a hostile environment because of his love for his brothers. He loves his father, he loves his brothers, right? But his reasoning was both. As a result of him not balking at the thought of the danger he might walk into, Jacob took that as a good sign that everything was going to be okay. Now, he wasn't wrong. Everything was going to be okay. We know how the story ends. But Jacob's timing was off. Jacob thought that Joseph would go and then come back, and we'll see it. But this is where he was mistaken. Again, not everything is... If Jacob really would have seen what exactly was going to happen, do you really think he'd let Joseph go? No. So he said to him, "Go now and see to your brother's welfare and the welfare of the flocks, and bring me back word." So he sent him from the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. Ve'amar lo, lech na re'e et shalom achecha ve'et shalom hatzon ve'hashiveni davar va'ishlachu mi'emek Hebron va'yavo Shechema. And furthermore, Joseph's desire to go for both those reasons mentioned was confirmed in this verse, as we have shalom written twice. This, of course, was also confirmation to Jacob that indeed he was protected. In addition to the fact that the text says Shema, which the letter Hey at the end, right, signifying that the Shechina is already there whenever there's a Hey at the end, right? Mitzrayimah, Goshna, Bavela. All decreed by God as a necessary sanctioned journey for our own good. You see, what Jacob understood was that Joseph had to be sent away, right? He had to survive and overcome obstacles and then return to him with the kingship. V'hashiveni davar. Bring back word, but it's also the kingship. But also, as Jacob would pass along his kingship to Joseph, being Yaakov Yosef, he knew that Yosef would have to become the attribute of Yesod. We haven't used this one in a long time. We'll just bring it out one time because I got to get a new one. Anyway, Tiferet, that's Yaakov Yesod. It's directly underneath, connecting to Malchut. This is the heart of Zeir Anpin. All right? This is the foundation that connects it all to Malchut, the kingdom, which is where we are at. Okay, so that's that. Let's continue. Technically speaking, Jacob could have easily been Yesod, in a sense, okay? Because the first time, what is Yesod? Well, we know what Yesod is. Because the first time any kind of seed came out of Jacob, he was 85 years old, with Leah, who he thought was Rachel. First time, meaning he never slipped up ever, not even any nighttime accidents. This is also why when he blesses Reuben on his deathbed, he called him, "Reuben, you are my strength," right? Because it was a lifetime of purity that was fused into the first son. But, as we know, it's what was to come out of Jacob, i.e. the children of Israel, that were tasked with establishing the foundation and building of the kingdom. Jacob couldn't do it all. The children of Jacob could. Israel, we are a people, not just a man. It grows from there. Now we know that in the future, Yosef would do just that. V'hashiveni davar, bring back word, bring back the kingship. When he sent for him, right? Go get my father. And he came to greet him. But the trials of Joseph were only about to begin. The city of Shechem, according to our sages, is called Makom Pur'anut, a place of calamity, lawlessness. And that's where his brothers were hanging out. This place of calamity also was about 120 kilometers away, and it's about a 24-hour walk. I Google Maps it, all right? So he sends his 17-year-old sheltered, gentle boy to track this road by himself. He really did have faith. He also knew that one cannot ascend lest they are tested. That's why I continuously say, when you're going through something difficult, that means that God loves you and he needs you to be right now at the next level. And because of everything that's happening, you will get tested much more. Everything is always a test, but just remember that. But as God and his judgments are perfect, since Jacob and Joseph were bound, we will come to learn that just as Jacob was separated from his father Isaac for 22 years, so too would Joseph be separated from his father Jacob for 22 years. The reason it mentions Joseph's age right in the first verse, that he was 17 years old, is to show us that Jacob cared for Joseph, and once he was taken, then in the end, it was Joseph who would take care of his father Jacob for 17 years in Egypt until he died. It's a perfect circle of judgment. Now the circle is complete, right? Yeah, okay. Then a man found him, and behold, he was straying in the field, and the man asked him, saying, "What are you looking for?" Vayimtzeu ish ve'ineh to'eh basadeh, vayishaluhu ha'ish le'emor ma tevakesh. Who is this man who found him? Let's see what the Zohar has to say about this, okay? Vayimtzeu ha'ish. Then a man found him. Why did the perfected Jacob, who loved Joseph better than his brothers, better than his other sons, and knew that his brothers hated him, send Joseph to them? Because he knew that they were righteous, and he didn't distrust them. The Holy One, blessed be he, caused all this to carry out to the decree he made to Abraham in the covenant of the pieces, also known as Brit Bein Aptarim, Brit, Yesod, connection, you see. We have found it stated in ancient books. They say this in the Zohar. I would love to get my hands on those ancient books. We have found it stated in ancient books that it was imperative that Jacob have mastery over Joseph before he descended to Egypt. Jacob is also Bnei Israel, meaning his brothers. For if he had gone there before they had dominated him, the Egyptians would have ruled over Israel in perpetuity, and Israel would not have been able to leave. Therefore, it came to pass that his brothers were Joseph's masters and sold him as a slave. Thus, when Joseph was later ruler over Egypt, Israel ruled over them. And that's how they're also able to leave. Come and behold, Joseph was the supernal covenant, Yesod, Brit. As long as the Brit, Joseph, endured, the Shekhinah lived within Israel in peace. Once Joseph was gone, sold as a slave, again, even when he was in bondage as a slave, the Shekhinah is not ruling over here. Once he was sold as a slave, the Shekhinah left Israel and they were in exile. This is another reason why Jacob lost his Ruach HaKodesh when this happened and could not see what happened to Joseph. What, the guy's got the force. He feels if there's a disturbance. He feels it a few times throughout, but, it was very specifically hidden from him. Because the Shekhinah was also a partaker in the taking of Joseph in this scheme. Again, in order to preserve life. Do not forget. Also later we see this in Exodus 1:8. A new king arose over Egypt who did not know about Joseph. When Joseph and his brothers died, slowly but surely it all changed from Israel. Rights started getting taken away. Give us your property. You can't work here. You can work, but you can't make money. And so on and so forth. Kind of like a Nazi Germany type of situation. Or 2020, whatever comes first. And so, who is this man? This refers to the archangel Gabriel, who commands the judgment in the world. This is all about judgment, this whole thing. Our sages compare this to Daniel 9:21. While I was still speaking in prayer, the man Gabriel, whom I saw in the vision at first, approached me in swift flight about the time of the evening offering. Ve'od ani medaber batfila ve'ha'ish Gabriel, asher ha'iti bechazon batchila. Okay. And one more thing for Vayimtzeu ish, then a man found him. If this man was mortal, it would have been written Vayir'ehu ish, and a man saw him in the field. But Gabriel was coming from heaven, and that's where he found him. And we're going to see exactly where he found him too. So, when a man found him, and behold, he was straying in the field, and the man asked him, saying, "What are you looking for?" Hebrew says very specifically, "Ma tevakesh," what are you asking? But could be straying in the field. It could also be wandering in the field. Again, it's the English translation. Straying, but they're both correct actually in the translation. Straying from the path because what he was about to go through would be exceedingly difficult. So somewhere his subconscious bells kicked in, like maybe we shouldn't be going in that direction. Wandering in the field, as he was wondering in every way how he could, I'll tell my brothers a joke. I'll say, hey guys, what's up? I'll tell them about the latest escapades with the sheep. Something. He was wondering how he could become one with his brothers. And in the field, perhaps an allusion for the Garden of Eden, right? Just like Isaac was walking in the field and the smell of a garden could have been the Garden of Eden in a sense, as that is the ultimate goal and destination of his journey. Also in the field, which is on the outside in the field and not inside the home, as Yosef the righteous did not yet rise to his attribute and still needed correcting and refining to take place, which he did. This shows us that Joseph was far from perfect, as he had many mistakes. To'eh basadeh, lost in the field. Also in the Hebrew, to'eh and ta'ut, even though it's a taf and a tet, sounds very similar. Ta'ut is a mistake. To'eh basadeh, ata to'eh, that's also, you are incorrect, basadeh. So anyway, this is with a taf. But again, all this is by design, as the angel Gabriel was sent to steer him in the right direction. No, that's where you need to go right now. Again, the angel Gabriel is not the Satan, is the angel Gabriel. So even though he comes in judgment, it's still in mercy. Now the heavens know that the main focus for a righteous man is to complete his tikkun. How do we know who the tzaddikim are in the world? Because their whole focus is to rectify the world, to do God's work. That is their tikkun. Not what kind of car I drive, how much money I make, or anything other than that. These are how we know who the tzaddikim are. Because they are focused 100% on God, or as much as humanly possible. So remember how Joseph began to mess up? It was all related to his brothers. This story is all about that. He spoke lashon hara against his brothers. He spoke evil tales about them. He acted deceitfully, although innocently. He probably didn't. He's like, yeah, they're speaking bad, so I gotta say something. Although, again, there are specific halachot about how all these things are done. And as the son of Jacob, he should have known better, even if he was correct. He even didn't have the common sense not to share his dreams with them, okay? And was quite flaunting of his favor. What a great coat I got. Look at these wonderful Technicolor stripes. This is anything but humble, right? You shouldn't be doing this. And so given the fact that this tzaddik needed to grow up to become Yosef HaTzaddik, he also understood that his correction would have to come by the same means of his sins. His brothers. Chadesh Yameinu Kekedem. We have to go back the same way we came to rectify that which was broken. And all leads us back to the point of origin, to the Yechidah, singularity. So when Gabriel asked him, Ma tevakesh, the word ma, mem he, as we discussed, represents the Zeir Anpin, the Tikkun Olam. And he had to establish his place in its foundation, to be the Yesod, the foundation. That's also why he asked him, Ma tevakesh, what do you want, as opposed to what are you looking for? And what is his heart's desire? To make a tikkun. How so? By what means? And he said, I'm looking for my brothers. Tell me now, where are they pasturing? My tikkun is through my brothers. He somehow understood this. His entire purpose is embedded in appeasement of his brothers. Now, this stuff is brilliant from Rav Vali. Now listen to this. While Joseph's desire is to unite with his brothers, meaning the unification of the 12 tribes. I get it, I know, Benjamin, but still, the tribes aren't united. The House of Israel is not united unless it's all 12. So the unification of all the 12 tribes, the angel Gabriel is hinting to him that this is not their desire at all. Look what he says. And the man said, they have traveled away from here, for I have overheard them say, let us go to Dotan. So Joseph went after his brothers, and he found them in Dotan. Vayomer ha'ish nas'u mizeh, Ki shamati omrim nerecha dotana. Vayomer ha'ish nas'u mizeh. And the man said, they have traveled away from here. Mizeh, from here. Mi is from zeh, here. Zeh is the numerical value 12. As in, they have moved away from your desire to unite, to become one. You see this? While Yosef, the tzaddik, Yosef HaTzadik, would have understood this very strong hint, Yosef, a tzaddik, did not heed the warning, right? It's like a Jedi Knight versus a Grand Master, okay? As he approaches his brothers, and they saw him from afar, and when he had not yet drawn near to them, they plotted against him to put him to death. So they said to one another, behold, that dreamer is coming. ויראו אותו מרחוק, ובטרם יקרב אליהם, ויתנכלו אותו לעמיתו. ויאמר איש אל אחיו, הנה בעל החלומות הזה בא. Vayomu ish elechav. These were surely Shimon and Levi, our sages say, who come from the strong side of judgment. Also a hint towards judgment is the fact that we just had the same influence of the ish, Vayomer ish elechiv, vayimtzeu ish basadeh, that directed him to where he needed to go. So, as we see, what began as judgment on Yaakov continued on to Yosef, and all the tribes were involved. Furthermore, everything was orchestrated by God. It was Gabriel who sent him ultimately to be taken, and it would be Gabriel who would teach Joseph the 70 languages 20 years later in the dungeons of Egypt that would enable him to become its ruler so he could ascend the steps. We discussed this last year. It was Jacob who declared, when the brothers brought him Joseph's coat, he recognized it and said, "It is my son's coat, a wild beast has devoured him." Which absolutely came to pass when Potiphar's wife, who was like a wild beast, a serpent incarnate in 39:12, so she grabbed him by his garment, saying, "Lie with me." But he left his garment. A wild beast indeed grabbed him by his garment. You see this? You see the link between these two? It's crazy. It was because Joseph saw the image of his father that he did not fall with her. And who sent him that image of his father, who said, "No, my son, this is not the way." This is God, who strengthened now an 18-year-old boy who is working together spiritually with his father to perfect the attribute of Tiferet and Yesod, and to become the link between Jacob, Tiferet, and Malchut, kingdom. They worked together in unison like Abraham and Isaac did in order to perfect Chesed and Gevurah. Yosef HaTzadik is born, and Israel can now finally live. And so while judgment will inevitably come upon Israel, if we are true to the commandments of God, to the covenant, to the Brit, to the Yesod, then it's all done through mercy. We will be victorious. Now this is more relevant now than ever before, as we're about to go into our third lockdown here in Israel, because this time it'll work for sure. Only now it's going to be 3 weeks, and they want to start this on Hanukkah. They're also starting to openly discuss the privileges of those who get vaccinated. Yeah, this is in the newspapers right now. You get a nice ID card. It shows that you're clean. And then you can, the privileges. You can fly. You can go to restaurants, movie theaters, hotels, gyms. They really get you where it hurts. And all that good stuff that makes, life what it is. You see, it'll start with the privileges for the vaccinated, and there will soon become severe prohibitions for those who don't. There will be checkpoints, not only at the entrances to these public places like supermarkets, but, even on the road. Show us your papers, only with an Israeli accent. Hey, maybe they'll even give us a nice band to wear where in Israel. Maybe it'll be like a Star of David. Something that can be seen at night, like a yellow flashy one. We can be identified easier. Let you roll your eyes. 70 years ago they said that could never happen. This time though, it's not going to happen, but not for the reasons that you're thinking. It's not for a lack of them trying. Can't you see where we're going? No one sees. It's like I told you. It's a slow boiling frog in the pot. If it's boiling, you can jump right in. Oh, it's good. Hey, look, they're letting us walk freely in the streets. They're so good to us. But this time, the era of Rav is going to be flushed out of Israel, because there's plenty of them walking around here too. Because after 2,000 years in exile, after 2,000 years in darkness, see, Ketz lachoshech, this is the end of darkness. And they want to start this on Hanukkah. They want to start the darkness on Hanukkah. Are they crazy? This brazenness is mind-boggling. It's like Iran every year comes out dafka on the month of Adar, Persia, on Adar, threatening to annihilate Israel. And within 24 hours, they get some natural disaster that kills thousands of people. And they don't learn, and yet no one sees the connection, and people still doubt God is in control. Don't mess with Israel. Not in Hanukkah, not in our land, not anymore. If we look at the past, our past, we can clearly see the shape of things to come. The story's not over yet, so stay tuned. You're in the story, I'm in the story, we're all in the story right now. Tomorrow, God willing, the missus and I, we have a few things to share with you. We're also going to discuss prophecies, Hanukkah, and specifically the signs of the times. So, in the meantime, thank you so much for joining me, and have a great day. See you later.